What's the moral difference, if any, between a civilian and a citizen?
A citizen accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the body politic, defending it with his life. A civilian does not.
The exact words of the text. But do you understand it? Do you believe it?
Hello, my name is Brian Kilcullen, and this video is the first in a series of press releases which promise to bring to the forefront of the American psyche, in whose hands the power of this nation truly lies, what defines a citizen, and the meaning of Enemies in War, a book I've written about government, our government, and the problems that arise when our perception differs from reality. In 1997, I attended a United States Customs auction where I unwittingly became entangled in a government-sanctioned fraud racket. My family and I had our lives turned upside down by government agents who brought false allegations, seized my property, and caused me tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, ultimately ruining my business. When I reached out for my rights as a citizen, though, I came up empty-handed. You see, my perception was that this gross misunderstanding would be rectified when these lawful government officials recognized their error and acknowledged my rights. The problem in this instance is that I was not dealing with lawful government officials. I was dealing with criminals. Criminals who were utilizing the law and law enforcement offices of our nation with which to enrich and protect themselves. In so doing, defrauding myself, yes, but at the same time, defrauding thousands more. What I didn't realize then, and what you most likely don't realize now, is that although our Constitution, that charter that defines these United States, provides for our protections, it doesn't elaborate on the fact that in order to preserve our liberties, it is not only a citizen's duty to assert them, but if necessary, fight for them. And yes, even if it means fighting our own government. Giving true meaning to those words, freedom is not free. Unfortunately today, most of us Americans have been lulled into the false belief that a citizen's duty ends at the ballot box, that our government will just provide for us. But just as in this case, it's a little hard to provide for the citizen when those in government are preoccupied providing for themselves. The question that should come to mind is, how is it our government has descended so far into the criminal today? Perhaps it's because we Americans have lost sight of the fact that these United States are supposed to be a self-governing society. Our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that followed were the first preeminent periods in history that the term United States of America was used. Let's be clear here. In order for this nation to call itself the United States of America, it must act in accordance with those fundamental principles and laws upon which it was formed. Though this crucial document has been amended some 27 times throughout our history, there is no amendment which supersedes or abolishes it. Consequently, the Constitution, just as articulated in its charter, is the supreme law of our land. No person seeking office under this Constitution, or a law brought in its name, is lawful if in violation of it. So before we fly off the handle and damn this nation, or worse, abandon it to those at its helm, perhaps we Americans should take the time and effort to study and understand what we have agreed to. Now I know that most of us have never realized that we are consenting parties to a contract. That contract being this Constitution. But stop and think about it. Don't we elect officials to a government created by this contract? And don't we support this government through our taxes because of it? Because you can't be free, truly free, and give up one's own liberties and monies just because someone says you have to. There must be an agreement, a written agreement that lays down the law to which we freely consent. After all, is not free will the most basic of all liberties? And for those who haven't yet grasped the true significance of our Constitution, it was specifically drafted to prevent those in government from arbitrarily changing the law to suit their own needs and whims. Therefore, in the United States of America, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not the government. This is the very premise upon which our founding fathers declared their independence and fought a war to maintain. They knew firsthand that without a Bill of Rights, liberty would be fleeting. Because what has historically been the greatest threat to individual liberties throughout time? Governments. In a self-governing society, such as these United States, government must be held accountable to the very people who support it, because governments have nothing, are nothing, and can do nothing but by the monies, power, and will that we, the people, provide. The problem today, though, is that most of us Americans, either out of ignorance or apathy, don't know, let alone seem to care about the institution that provides us the ability to govern ourselves, giving rise to a society that fails to live up to their duty to preserve their own individual liberties, and in the same instant, giving those in government a blank check to do, or more pointedly, take whatever they wish. Sound familiar? This is the greatest travesty of all, because it inverts the very premise upon which governments are created. Instead of our government serving us, we end up serving it. An unbelievable absurdity, because it misconstrues that power descends from those in government, when in fact it is we who bestow upon these fellow citizens of ours the very powers with which they command us, leaving ourselves today with merely the choice of which master we will serve. This Constitution, no matter what preconceived notions one may have, is an empowerment of us, the people, just the same as it is those persons who purport to serve us. But of course, you can't assert, let alone fight for, what you don't even know is yours. For example, most Americans believe that it was left up to our government alone to bring criminal charges and prosecution. This couldn't be further from the truth. The power, the duty to bring capital or otherwise infamous prosecution was constitutionally relegated to us, the people, a right and protection which we abandoned many years ago when what is known today as public prosecutors were introduced. Once done, is it any wonder that our government historically has found little to prosecute in its own ranks? Answering the question of how it is our government has descended so far into the criminal today. This brings me back to my book, which in actuality is really not a book at all. Breaking news. On July 4th, 2008, a citizen of this nation, pursuant to his Fifth Amendment right, brought a lawful criminal indictment against a number of fellow Americans, some who purport to be lawful officials of these United States. The charges brought were of a number of violations of federal statute, to include but not limited to predicate acts of racketeering and an extrinsic fraud which extends from 1997 through present day. Charged with the prosecution of this matter were President George W. Bush, Attorney General Michael Mukasey, and Inspector Generals Dennis Schindel for the Department of the Treasury, Richard Skinner for the Department of Homeland Security, and Glenn Fine for the Department of Justice. This constitutes the highest executive and law enforcement offices of this nation, and even though service was made upon all those named over 5 months ago, not a word has been heard. Silence is not always golden, especially since some thousands of our fellow citizens were silenced as a proximate consequence of the racketeering organization named within this indictment. I, Brian Kilcullen, have brought this indictment in the public domain for the benefit and protection of we the people of these United States, in part because I have standing to do so, but primarily because our government officials steadfastly refuse to, thereby affording these criminals all the protections that otherwise would have been afforded those thousands of citizens they supposedly served. Where did this ongoing U.S. Customs fraud racket and cover-up originate? In that very district of the United States where Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, Zia Jarrah, and most of the muscle hijackers lived, trained, and planned for the attacks of September 11, 2001. The indictment, Enemies in War, may be obtained at enemiesinwar.com.